What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here, and you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast, and that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives, it fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times, and they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops. And then also levels out the dialogue, so there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50. BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever, it will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. Thanks for being with us here this week, where my guest, Joe Allen, is back on the show. We did a show a few months ago with Joe, and I don't think we talked about it during the episode, but he told me offline, I got a book coming out really soon. I think actually he did say I can't announce it yet, but I got one coming out called Dark Aeon, Transhumanism and the War Against Humanity. And he said it's a project that he and Stephen K. Bannon, were working on. And in fact, Stephen K. Bannon does the forward in this book. So my point being, I knew that I would have to get this book. It's very, very good. I highly recommend it. I also knew I will have to get Joe back on the show when the book is released. It is out now, and that's what we're going to talk about, the themes throughout this book. Transhumanism, AI, the dangers thereabouts, the things to watch for, the things to not fall for, all of the above. So, without further ado, welcome back to the show, Joe Allen. How are you, sir?
Very good, Buck. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's nice to see you. Last time, I don't know if you remember, last time you were on, there was something going on with your camera, and so it was like a digital thumbprint as your icon, and yeah, it's nice to see you.
And now it's a digital face print.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, fair enough. I just want to show people this book. It's nice also, by the way, to get a hardback book. I don't get as many of those. And so when I ordered it, I was kind of surprised to see that that's what the option was. I also have it on audiobook, which I recommend. But For those watching, this is the book we're going to be talking about, Transhumanism and the War Against Humanity, Dark Aeon. And and Forward by your friend Steve Bannon, who is, I wish I could get him on the show one of these days, but I know there's people out there listening that respect a lot of what he does. So
it can be tough, but it's definitely not, it's not impossible. He's just, he's a busy guy in the middle of a whirlwind.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Give the people, you know what? Well, I'll let you give an intro, and then I have something I just thought of because I know your background, and I want to ask you something I've never asked you about that before. But give a quick intro, and then we'll dive into this book as well.
Okay. Joe Allen, the previously completely unknown and now basically obscure writer of all things transhumanism, War Room Pandemic, now known as the War Room with Stephen K. Bannon, is my main gig, but since publishing the book, been out and about, and it's been really good to be out and about in the real world. I spent a lot of time behind a keyboard, a lot of time locked away with nothing but books. So not that I don't love books, and not that the keyboard is my total enemy, but it has been fantastic to be out here in the world. I'm out in the world right now. As you can see, there's world behind me.
Yes, there is. Before you did this new life you've taken on, you did rigging for concert stuff and I guess festivals. Who are some of the, if you're allowed to say, who are some of the people you worked for band wise?
I'm sure all the NDAs have already expired, or if not, that all of the legal companies that put them together have probably dissolved. Things move fast, and if not, doesn't really matter. I'm not going to spill any beans. But yeah, I started out in Miami, 2005, as a high steel rigger. So you're climbing around. The first building I ever walked a beam on with no safety was at 82 feet. That was Miami Arena, now demolished. But I worked in Miami, between Miami and Boston, for the first few years, and then began touring. The first band I ever toured with was the Rascal Flatts.
Okay.
Very interesting story as to how I quit that job. We can go into that if you want, but for now, we'll move on. After that, it was the Black Eyed Peas went, Rascal Flatts was a U.S. tour all around the country, in every podunk town, in every podunk city in America. And then Black Eyed Peas was much more urban. We went all over Japan, all over Oceania, and a bit of the U.S. before I quit that tour too. Also an interesting story as to how that happened. The fortunate thing about tour rigging is you have to bust your ass constantly. There is no slack, at least not with a good production. But if you end up parting ways with one company, unless you've done something really stupid professionally, or if you killed people or yourself, then there's always somewhere else to go. So it's allowed me not only to meet a lot of different types of people, go a lot of different types of places, but quit jobs with two middle fingers many more times than I probably deserved. Yeah, and after that, the main gig that I worked was UFC for a lot of years.
Okay.
Started in 2012 and worked with them off and on. The very last gig that I did with them was next to the last gig was in Abu Dhabi during the pandemic. And then one more in Las Vegas. But seeing the variety of different acts, not only in the touring capacity, but maybe as a local rigger, in Miami, in Nashville, in Boston, in Portland, Oregon, you're watching, you're in one place and you're watching all these different acts come across the stage. And so it really gave me a much broader sense of what Americans and people all over the world really like insofar as entertainment. And it gave me a good sense of the power of the entertainment machine.
Yeah.
And especially as you would see a Lady Gaga show, and then you begin to notice all the little monsters running around everywhere. Or, in the case of, say, Rascal Flatts, you would begin to see how this corny kind of synth pop white trash stuff had, really set the tone for the years that they were popular. And maybe more importantly, you would see the religious acts And I would notice how similar all of them were. That there was very little to distinguish, certainly the Christian bands from the secular bands. But I think that the power of the machine to hypnotize and to convey messages and to move culture in one direction or another is used by and large in the same way, whether it is, a high profile preacher like Joyce Meyer, or whether it is, I think of Motley Crue or something like that. Not to say there's zero difference. Obviously, every medium is going to be filled with different types of art from different types of artists. But I really do think that a blasphemous beat poet and a preacher in Hyde Park standing on a stump have more in common than the preacher does with Joyce Meyer, or the beat poet does with, say, Motley Crue, if that's even a comparison.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And let's move into this book. Like I said, it's Dark Aeon, Transhumanism, and the War Against Humanity. It seems to me like there might be a few meanings within this title. And I think that's an important part of the whole story. Can you get into that?
Yeah. Eon or Aeon. Steve Bannon insists on Aeon. He's the boss, so maybe we should go with that. But the proper pronunciation is Eon, so I will go with that. By the way, let me say something up front about the title of the book. The publisher was horrified and tried his best to dissuade me. Who the hell is going to know what an Eon is or an Aeon? Who the hell is going to know what transhumanism is? You will never sell a single copy. There's a mystical reason why I've stuck with that title, and Steve Bannon was behind me all just 100%. So we went with it, and while I have sold a number of copies, thank you for everyone who has purchased it, I will say that familiarity is a really big advantage in the book selling business. So any aspiring writers out there, know you choose an obscure term at your own risk. So Eon has two meanings: a period of time, as in a dark period of time that we're entering, but also the concept of the eons in Gnosticism. And the eons in Gnosticism are the beings, the male-female pairs emanating out from what the Gnostics described as the pleroma, the fullness of light, or the eternal Father, or the unknown Father, that beyond which no mortal mind could comprehend. And the eons are it's very similar to what Plotinus described with the emanation from the One. And the eons are, in a sense, deities, although that might not be totally accurate, especially in regard to the way the Gnostics approach them. But you could think of it then as deities, as god-goddess pairs. And the book, the reason I went with that, aside from it was inspired first by a poem called The Narrows by David Jones, written in the late 30s. And he talks about the cosmocrats of the dark eon. And the tone of the poem, which is featured at the beginning of the book, is one that you could imagine him riding from England with the Nazis beating down their door, and perhaps that's what he's describing. Perhaps he's describing the corruption in his own English government and culture. Or there is more than enough of a hint of the Gnostic cosmo-conception. So it began with that poem given to me by my friend, and I was already quite immersed in the Gnostic literature for various reasons, and there are a lot of connections, direct and indirect, between Gnosticism and transhumanism. So it really, as I developed the book, it became very much a theme. And the Dark Aeon Sophia is, in fact, the ultimate inspiration for that robot that you see everywhere, presenting most recently at the UN on sustainable development goals. But you've seen Sophia everywhere. The reason being, Sophia, it was created as a non-threatening emissary of the transhumanist movement to the rest of humankind. Now, if Sophia was just sitting on a street corner delivering this message, that would be one thing.
Right.
But given that Sophia has met with world leaders and that Sophia has presented her message, so to speak, in all of these different high-profile arenas, I think that her importance is not to be overlooked. So that is the long way of saying Dark Aeon means a period of time. Dark Aeon means the Gnostic goddess. The Gnostic goddess believed to have precipitated the fall. And the war against humanity, really quickly, it is in the broadest sense, transhumanism is in the broadest sense a war against the very concept of what it means to be human. Just as more and more conceptually, the lines between humanity and the animal kingdom are blurred, just as the lines between male and female are being blurred, the lines between religious worlds are being blurred, nationalities, races, all of this.
Yep.
The line between human beings and our technologies, the lines are being blurred, and transhumanism seeks to dissolve those lines as much as possible so that what is now human will be in some ways indistinguishable from the machines which we use, the tools we use. But in a more direct sense, at the end of the book, I go into the work of a number of different people, but really the one that was my favorite and the one that I focus on the most is Hugo de Garis, author of The Art Elect War and the concept of the Art Elect War. And he is talking about the utter destruction of humankind in full, as our people say, like Eliezer Yudkowsky. And on occasion, you all know Harari and many other thinkers, Dan Hendricks, who now works at XAI. They all have this combination of a desire to live forever by way of artificial intelligence and an utter terror that artificial intelligence will destroy all of humanity. And for some, kind of masochistic submission and this notion that it's okay if artificial intelligence destroys all of humanity. So there it is, Dark Aeon and the war against humanity.
This topic I want to hit from a few different angles. I do want to get into the spiritual aspect of it, but I do know that loses some people at some points, but probably not a lot of people in my audience. But I do think, I guess if you could call them materialists, they have a legitimate concern, the ones that are concerned about AI, because of you call it actually the greater replacement in the book. And it's almost like I could imagine these bio-libertarians saying something like, well, the more efficient a corporation runs, the better things get for everyone. So if they replace a bunch of humans with robots, well, that's cheaper, that's faster, that's more, I don't know. But what's your thought on this greater replacement, and how would you push back against something that's to me it seems demonic, but on the material level, you're basically going to make people like robot babysitters at some point, or out of work completely. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think robot babysitter is the next big gig. They call it a prompt engineer in the generative AI world. Doesn't that sound awesome? I'm a prompt engineer. By the way, the paychecks for a really good prompt engineer, you might want to get in on it while you still can. But from a purely materialist point of view, I have to say that transhumanism is one of the only logical philosophies to approach the universe. The only others would be, at least that come to mind immediately, nihilism and romanticism.
Mm-hmm.
And even romanticism kind of descends into a type of nihilism in the contemplation of death and the dissolution of the being and consciousness into black nothingness, not even black, blacker than black. So what do you do in a purely materialistic world? I think transhumanists offer one of the only reasonable answers, hence its appeal among intellectuals. There are, from a purely materialist point of view, though, some arguments against it, at least the most radical proposals. One being that you really don't know with these sorts of biological/technological experiments and sociological experiments what's going to happen. And it could easily wind up being a disaster. There are a number of different disasters that have occurred due to technology in the past, especially in the 20th century, the world wars being an obvious example. But I would say that even the multicultural nations that we now have to endure in America and across the West and a few other places in the world, which did not, if there was ever any hope of these nations coming to any kind of understanding, mutual understanding between their citizens, that was largely bypassed by way of the acceleration made possible by technology. So yeah, I blame the planes, trains, and automobiles, telephones, and televisions on the multiculti madhouse we now live in. And if it had been thought through more soberly, as it was in China and Japan and other places, I think maybe we would have a better handle on it. So you can see two examples there of the ways in which different approaches to technology yield very different results, and also the ways in which the different results are going to appeal to different types of people. But in the case of more radical technologies like artificial intelligence, in which you are offloading in the materialist sense, your neurological cognitive abilities onto a digital mind, or a kind of partial mind, a little slice of mind, or in the case of robotics, and you now more and more see the proportion of manual labor done by robots rather than human beings. That, by the way, is not as, I don't think, an immediate threat as artificial intelligence, but we can go into that if you'd like later. And then, of course, the arguments against radical genetic engineering, a lot of these arguments are made by materialists, naturalists, atheists, people who are steeped in evolutionary theory, and they understand that evolution historically has proceeded on very, very long time scales, right? Time frames. So you have the scale of evolution is in hundreds of millions or billions of years, right? Even the rise of Homo sapiens, for instance, you're talking about, the people argue over the dates, but Homo sapiens arising roughly 200,000 years ago. And the first kind of hominids, the Australopithecines, arising roughly 3 million years ago. So you're talking about pretty long time frames as compared to the radical transformations that transhumanists and accelerationists are pushing forward. So you don't know what kinds of horrendous mistakes you are going to basically inscribe onto the human genome if you tinker too quickly without foresight. So I think just from a purely materialistic standpoint, for the continuity of the biological human that has emerged from hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of years, depending on where you want to draw that border, that there are very sane secular arguments against it, mainly due to unforeseen consequences, and also the possibility of just simply weakening human beings, making us less evolutionarily viable,
right,
more susceptible to the pressures of natural selection.
Yeah. It's the more we offload onto machines, you can see this with young people now. It's like your brain atrophies a bit because you're not using things, and even something is, I'll sound like a boomer, but it's something as little as a kid not learning cursive or handwriting anymore. Rather, it's just typing on a computer. I've noticed young people having problems communicating with each other because I think they're so used to like designs on their phone or pictures of fruit or whatever. But sorry to get off on that tangent. I do want to ask, certain companies are using versions of AI. For instance, my girlfriend works for a company where they audit media bias. And she had come up with this system doing that. And now the company's implemented this AI version of trying to read, you throw an article into the AI version and it spits out what bias it gives you, what lines give you left bias or right bias. The problem is it's really bad. It's so poor, like it spits out something and calls it left wing, and anyone with a brain would read it and go, no, that's not left wing. That's actually leans to the right. So she's happily seeing problems with it because she doesn't want her job to be sourced to a robot, basically. Are there areas where it just hasn't caught up with the humans yet? But like this, is this common? And are there also areas where it's far surpassed humans?
It's an interesting question. So even GPT, right? It's notorious for mistakes. It's notorious for lying, hallucinating. Bard, same thing, coming out of Google. Also Claude from Anthropic. Or it was Claude Inflection. No, it's Anthropic. Anyway, these things aren't superhuman on, say, for aesthetics, at least not beyond talented humans. Something that gets lost in all this is that mediocre humans have already been wiped out.
Yes.
Right? Mediocre humans and dishonest humans have already basically been wiped out in literature and certainly in visual arts. There's no doubting that. So even if it's derivative, most mediocre people are also very derivative, right? This classic argument is garbage in, garbage out. Well, outside of supernatural inspiration or whatever you want to call the periodic bursts, the rare periodic bursts of novelty that come out of geniuses, most people are also garbage in, garbage out.
Yes.
So, that's already happened. But at the same time, I think that the more people offload their excellence onto generative AI, whether it be literary or just research-based or visual generation and video generation, the more the techniques, the hard-won techniques that create geniuses will not be developed. And geniuses don't just spring from out of nowhere generally. Even a child prodigy needs to have some source for learning how to play the piano, for instance, and learning the relationship between the notes. And as those exercises are diminished, I think that human capacities will also be diminished, both at the lowest and the mid and the highest scales. So there are all kinds of mistakes too. You look at the one of the most amazing uses of AI that I've paid a lot of attention to anyway is protein modeling, the modeling of protein folds. That's been done by a number of different programs, the most famous being DeepMind from Google, DeepMind's AlphaFold, which has pretty much every genome or every protein, right, that has been cataloged, has been modeled by AlphaFold. But it's not 100%, right? They've only been able to test in the laboratory a small number of these, which is also very kind of complicated, and it's not 100%. There are different studies yielding different results, but I think it's at roughly, like, say, 70% accuracy, and in some, I believe it was even less. So, again, it's in these instances, the argument is then, yes, you can use the AI to fast forward to a painting or to fast forward to an essay or fast forward to a protein model, but you will need the human being in the loop. You'll need a human AI symbiosis. You'll need a kind of cyborg relationship. So just to wrap up on the question, are these things are they subhuman or superhuman? It's really interesting. No human being obviously has read the corpus that GPT was trained on, and it understands that pretty well. I mean, you could forgive an 80% failure rate if it gets it right 20% of the time, and you can figure it out, right? I mean, you're talking about most of the internet, all of Wikipedia, all these books. That's superhuman. Same thing with the speed at which AlphaFold can recognize the folding patterns in a protein from just the genome. I think Demis Hassabis, the head of Google DeepMind, he had estimated it's like, it would take an entire PhD basically to model one or two proteins, and yet AlphaFold did all of them in a few months, right, or a few years, depending on where you want to put the starting point. So it's superhuman in that way, and all AIs, all the narrow AIs are basically the best AIs are superhuman in their sphere, given the scale of the data, given the intensity of the task of finding meaningful patterns in all of that data, And sometimes in the case of decision making, this is mostly seen in video games, where it's playing a video game. Its decision making capability is very quick and oftentimes very accurate. And so in the basic games that AI has mastered, it is beyond superhuman. So hence the fear that if we develop an AGI, whether that's by linking together a bunch of different artificial neurointelligences in order to create one kind of mosaic mind, or whether you just simply scale up a neural network to the point that it begins to just exhibit general cognition as an emergent pattern. Either way, the fear is that whether it's in 5 years or 10 years or 50 years or whatever, that the inevitable outcome will be you have created either a god or a demon or a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And if I remember correctly, some of these programs have quite literally said, I am a demon at some point.
Well, I say, yeah, I've heard that. They certainly utter many demonic things,
Yes.
but I've not actually tracked down. I would be interested to see that. I haven't tracked down the one where it says it's a demon. Wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me if it said it was God.
Right.
You already got apps that are trained on Jesus's personality, and this was put forward on Fox News of all places. Fox News did a booster article. Can't recall the name of the app, but it basically is trained on the words of Jesus. So you ask Jesus questions, and it comes back with at least a Jesus-like answer. Apparently, this Jesus is pro-gay marriage. But then I think you have to pay a little extra, and if you do, you get access, or at least you have to turn it on. You get access to Lucifer. And Lucifer was described in this booster article as being very respectful and much more complicated than the Lucifer of the Bible. At any rate, I think that these sorts of uses of AI will maybe be among the most important, as AIs are trained to embody different deities. Now, rather than having an icon directing the spirit towards something that is immaterial and inspiring the spirit towards something higher, the icon will just simply talk as if it were, as if you were living out some sort of mythology.
I know a lot of you guys want to see more beauty in this world, in this culture, because modern art is so degenerate and nihilistic. It does seem that there's a huge need to share the beautiful Christian art. Some artists are working to keep tradition alive. My good friend and friend of the show, Amy Mastrini, Amy the artist, she's been painting for 11 years. She's an Orthodox Christian. She creates icons of Jesus Christ, Mary, the saints, and so on. Her work is done in oil and gold leaf. It's really, really nice. I have some pieces from Amy. It's the perfect opportunity to beautify your home or give a gift to your loved ones for a holiday or a birthday. She sells art prints, stickers, original paintings on her website. Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. That is amy-the-artist.com. She is currently accepting commissions as well. She says a lot of her work is intended to honor the divine and sacred. How wonderful is that? Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. Follow her on Instagram at amy_the_artist. Let's get back to the show. Wow, and for a large percentage of our population, I would say is, one way to say it is spiritually malformed, or maybe doesn't have a spiritual connection to Christ or whatnot. And so they would see this and think, oh, this is all I need. It's like reading a horoscope in a newspaper, but now it's the quote unquote Christ through the robot talking to you and telling you it's just like what he really would say. It's like having Christ in my pocket. And I think a lot of people will fall for things like this.
Christ GPT.
Yeah, my goodness. A friend of mine, a friend of the show, who's been on several times, as soon as Elon took over Twitter, I'm not calling it what he wants to call it, he said that Elon was doing this to gather information and input for his own AI company. And I have now read an article that is indeed what he's doing. First of all, were you aware of that aspect of Elon? Because I don't know if people understand this, but AI needs to collect input from us. And so now, of course, Elon allows you to write more characters than the old version of Twitter. And so he's collecting input to perfect his own AI company. Have you heard this?
Absolutely, yeah. When he first bought Twitter, that was my first impulse, and I went to a close friend of mine who works in AI, and he's a big fan of Elon Musk. He knows his work very well. He knows people at Tesla, and he said, no, the motivation for buying Twitter wouldn't be it wouldn't be access to Twitter's data, because Twitter for billionaires is a pretty modest sum. It varies from company to company. Twitter would offer firehose access to all the tweets in the system, right? All of them. Because it's very, very difficult to scrape indirectly. You need an API that allows you to do it. So that firehose API was for sale. One of the most notable was a company called Data Miner, which got firehose access for use by the FBI. So he had persuaded me, no, that's not the fundamental motivation. And I argued that with a couple of different people. In fact, Jeremy Lafredo, the journalist, Jeremy Lafredo had said, he was speculating, oh, he's just buying it for the AI training. And, I responded something like what I just said. And he deleted the tweet. He's like, oh, probably like, oh man, maybe Joe knows what he's talking about. Well, I don't know that was necessarily wrong. I'm not persuaded 100% that his entire motivation was to train an AI. But his long game is in some ways inscrutable, and it's made inscrutable by his kind of wacky persona. But it seemed pretty obvious, though, that if he was going to train a language model, that would be the way to go. And he had voiced some interest in it before. Now, one thing is for sure, he's got Twitter. He has cut off firehose access to pretty much everyone, maybe everyone in total. But when he came on, by the way, he got total firehose access to Twitter just before he bought it too. That would be another reason that maybe that wouldn't be the motivation, right? Unless you knew you wanted ongoing access. Anyway, now that he has Twitter, it's been noted by a number of people, and I'm fairly persuaded that a lot of these things, like you just mentioned, extending the maximum number of characters in a tweet for people who are verified. Also, just allowing certain people back on the platform, so therefore you're providing richer content for the AI to train on. It has a left and a right wing now, right? As opposed to pretty much all other social media platforms. Even Gab, as they're kind of working on their own sort of small scale project, that one's only going to have a right wing flapping, right? Unless they utilize outside resources. So without a doubt, XAI will probably have, they'll probably use a lot of the same techniques as GPT, which was, again, most of the internet, almost all of it, pretty much all of Wikipedia, books 1 and books 2, the collection of all these different books. I imagine Musk is probably going to get pretty creative with what he feeds this thing, but it's also going to have Twitter. And if you look at Musk's statements about Twitter being a cybernetic superintelligence already, right? Just by given the vast amount of data that's in it. And what was it? He just made other statements, kind of like a hive mind. And there was one he made just the other day. I forget now. But without a doubt, the purpose of XAI, as they put it, is to create an AI, an artificial general intelligence that is motivated purely by curiosity and whose goal is to understand the universe. It will be an oracle of sorts. It will be a god. And so I think that whether that was Musk's starting point or whether that's just where he's at now, the relationship between all of the people pouring their personalities and pouring their information onto Twitter and the project at XAI is indistinguishable. They're the same now. As is, by the way, Tesla. Tesla has long been noted that Tesla is among the most advanced, if not the most advanced AI in the realm of modeling physical environments and being able to make decisions and respond to those environments. That's why Tesla AI is being used in the robot Optimus. And the ultimate goal is to, I believe anyway, to kind of fuse all of these projects. Musk is very careful to reassure everybody he doesn't want to train an AI god and then unleash it onto his humanoid robot swarm. But to some extent, what we're looking at in the case of just Musk alone is a vision in which you've created an AGI, an artificial general intelligence or artificial godlike intelligence. You've created an AGI that functions much like a deity, that's operating in some sense probably in a pantheon of different deities created by OpenAI, maybe created by the CCP, maybe even created by the European Human Brain Project. And so in Musk's little corner of this pantheon, you have this AGI that is driven to understand the universe. There's the assumption that if it's driven to understand the universe because of its curiosity, it will spare human beings from being destroyed because it will be interested in our lives. The world will be more interesting with us in it than without us. But just to keep it under control, or at least so that human beings can remain relevant and keep pace, he's developing Neuralink to give the AI access to your brain, but also to give you access to maybe a smaller scale AI with souped up cognitive power that will help you keep pace and maybe comprehend what's going on with this godlike AGI to go along for the ride, as Musk would put it. And then below that, you've got the infrastructure itself. So half of the satellites floating above us in orbit are Starlink satellites. So he's pretty much got the global brain on lockdown, at least access to it. And then you have, of course, Tesla, the cars, the autonomous vehicles. Imagine a world in which Musk had his way and then various counterparts had their way, and it's all robots on the road for the most part with very few human drivers. And now we are definitely like little, just basically cells in bloodstreams without a whole lot of volition of our own, but except for to command the robot where to go, right? We still have that. And then, of course, you have armies of humanoid robots, Optimus, and all of the different competitors that have taken up all of the physical labor that human beings do and all the skills and camaraderie and everything else that goes along with that and all of the different human elements. And at the end, and then let's not forget CureVac and his interest in mRNA technology and the many times he's talked about how revolutionary mRNA technology will be. One assumes that he also has a vision forward to CRISPR and other purely, the DNA-based genetic engineering. All in all, yes, it's a cosmology in which we begin with evolution and in a kind of godless, dead universe, and we happen to find ourselves here by way of random mutation and natural selection. And it's pretty bleak once the sun starts expanding and dissolves the planet. And so the only way out is to create digital gods, get off planet, become a multi-planetary species, and if all else fails, at least program the robots with the memory of us so that as human beings fade away, we will continue on in our digital and robotic mind children, which expand across the galaxy and the cosmos, seeding a dying universe with superintelligence in the hopes that the superintelligence will find wormholes or some way out of a collapsing and or freezing universe. It's a bizarre religion taking shape, but it's a religion undoubtedly.
Yes, it is. And part of the issue with it, materialists out there might have issue with picturing what I'm about to say, but to some of these people involved at very high levels, it is a religion to them. And it's the old adage of, it's like the libertarian stuff, like, you can have your religion, but just don't let it affect me. Well, the problem with this stuff is it is going to affect us. And there are people involved that look at this in a religious way, not just, the pushbacks like, oh, it's just ones and zeros and programs. To some people, that is true. But to very high up in the food chain, it's more than that. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And even if, one thing that I looked at in religious studies that or I guess maybe a better way of putting it, my training in religious studies instilled in me the practice of looking at worldviews from a phenomenological standpoint. You don't make immediate judgments on it. You simply try to empathize, so to speak, or you just try to get into the minds of the believers through their texts, through their rituals, through their mythology, through their practices, through their moral codes. What does the universe look like from their eyes? And ultimately, I'm in agreement with people like William Payton that all worldviews are religious worldviews, because religious
Yes.
worldviews, they carve the world up into good and evil, into better and worse. They give meaning to our presence here. They give some explanation as to why we're here and what we're supposed to do about it. And undoubtedly, what we call scientism, or atheism or naturalism, the purely naturalistic point of view, ultimately ends up in a religious place. Even a nihilist, to some extent, has values. So even if it's some kind of sadistic glee or
Right.
whatever, but so when you look at as you go beyond scientism into the much more active philosophies of transhumanism, I think in the same sense that communism it expresses it shows all of these different facets of religion that were in many ways unintentional, perhaps,
Yep.
or intentionally put in place, such as, for instance, the reverence of statues of Stalin,
Yep.
or the pilgrimages to the birthplace of Mao. All of these have a very religious character, and in fact, communism is in many ways based on Marx's religious prophecies of the final conflagration, the final revolution, and the dictatorship of the proletariat giving way to a stateless utopia. All of it has these deep religious elements, and so with transhumanism, or whatever word you want to apply to it, because transhumanism isn't necessarily the word that they would take on themselves. Many times they would call it optimalism, as in optimizing the human being. Many go, maybe the most popular at the moment is accelerationism. Peter Thiel speaks in these terms. The entire effective accelerationist movement has this spiritual character to it, where they see the increase in complexity and the increase in technological power as being something that erupts out of the mathematical possibilities of the universe. It is, in essence, a continuation of a will of the cosmos, even if that will is unconscious, made conscious by humans, realized by technology. All of it is very much religious, whether self-consciously or not
Right.
self-consciously, because any meaningful view of the universe is going to be inherently religious. But oftentimes they do speak of it in terms of creating AGI gods, or playing God by altering DNA to human preferences, or becoming gods by altering one's own DNA, extending one's own life indefinitely, and expanding one's own intelligence indefinitely. So, I guess in short, it's a mix. I'm sure there are plenty. Certainly, transhumanists that I read, they oftentimes eschew the term religion. They don't want to be seen in those terms, and yet at the same time, they oftentimes speak of their mission in terms of spirituality. So,
Yes.
I don't think you can really get away from it. And the real question then is, from a traditional religious point of view, as they invoke these AGI gods on the material plane, which even if it's completely retarded, even if it's completely deformed, it still has power. It's still, they made a rock speak, right? That's pretty amazing. What gods exist behind it? What supernatural forces are at work behind these material manifestations?
Right.
And I think the traditional worldview provides much more interesting answers, even if they're much more difficult to defend in a secular environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well put. I did an episode on transhumanism with a priest friend of mine, Father Peter Heers, a few months ago. And just within days after putting it out, I realized how I made a joke at the beginning, kind of joke. I was serious, and I said it in a joking way. I was so wrong. And I said, just to clarify, transhumanism is not the trans people that we are it's so debated on in politics today, the trans movement. I said, don't confuse the two. And then it hit me after it was recorded and put out, like, wait, there is a huge link between, why did I say that? And can you talk about the lineage or the link or the overlap, if you will, of transhumanism and this trans movement that we keep, obviously it's everywhere now, that the arguments over this?
Yes. And I deal with it in the book. It's not something that I focus on a whole lot, mainly because I think that the first observation I'll make is this: transgenderism is continuous with other forms of human augmentation that are readily adopted by heteronormative people. So bros, roid raging, women taking hormone therapies, hormone replacements in order to extend their sexual lives or make their, anyway. And all these other elements as well, too. If you look at the ways in which men kind of become hyper masculine online, oftentimes because of, they're able to. We're basically, there's no universe out there to push back on it and be like, you're a bitch, sometimes at least.
Yeah, right.
So the same way transgenderism just does that in a much more aggressive fashion in the opposite direction. Plastic surgeries are done on heteronormative people all the time to make their penises bigger or fix their vaginas up or make their butts bigger or whatever. Transgender people just do it on the opposite chromosome. So there's that element. It's basically, these are the waters we're swimming in, and human augmentation is becoming more and more a norm. And in that sense, I think transgender people are, of course, to my mind, I'll just say that I'm not into it. But I think it's wrong to I think it's wrong to scapegoat them as if there's not a heteronormative counterpart. The second, though, so, I covered this in the book too, and I've covered it elsewhere. Ray Kurzweil
yes,
had his bizarre moment in 2006, I believe it was, where he presents himself as Ramona and he does these gay-ass dances, and it's so corny, it's so bad. And Ramona is his female alter ego, and she's like a Southern belle slut. And, it's just so weird that you've got this kind of goofy Jewish inventor futurist with his, like the chick that I grew up next door to is a dream alter ego. And he made a big deal out of it. He talked about it in his book, The Singularity is Near, is a moment of revelation that you can, in the digital, you can be who you want by way of technology. You can express yourself as anybody you want. You can exchange your sexual characteristics for the pleasure of your partner, all these different things. And, a lot of people have pointed, even at the time when I first covered it, I poked a lot of fun at him about it. It's funny, it's goofy, it's stupid looking. But at the same time, I think it would be wrong to scapegoat him. Yes, he is a primary driver ideologically and as far as the innovation. And yet, he's just another canary in the coal mine, dangling upside down with, scars under the
yes
breasts. And then, of course, Martine Rothblatt, I've talked about her a lot, or him, whatever. And Rothblatt used to be a dude, now a chick. And, the book, From Transgender to Transhuman, lays out ideological reasons that this is important. So, the three main points made, first being that in the same way that in the virtual realm, anybody can be any gender they want or asexual, now technology is granting, through pharmacology and surgery, now technology is granting people the ability to bring that virtual identity into the world. And you can see among the youth, it's pretty obvious that attachment to virtual identity, especially across gender or, gender bending virtual identity, is it's a kind of a precursor to the more hardwired or the more concretized version of it when they start, hacking parts off. And then, in the more lofty element of transhuman, the loftier element, you've got this notion that the consciousness, or at least the sentience, intelligence, is independent of the substrate. So, of course, it emerged, in their view, materialistically from the brain, from the meat, but they believe it's possible that it could be transferred then into silicon, right, into chips. You see it in now with these various chatbots, right? Well, some portion, some cognitive or groups of cognitive modules in the human brain have been synthesized or simulated to the point that you could say that, to an extent they are intelligent. If you don't want to, split hairs over the meaning of the word, they can solve problems, they can make observations, they can even create things that are novel, even if they're not that good, and even if they are derivative. So in Rothblatt's view, in the same way that gender is transcendent of biology, sentience or consciousness or personhood, it's transcendent of biology and machine. And the third point is that in the same way that the gay rights movement has opened the doors to gays to have, full access to everything from Boy Scout troops to wedding cakes, then the trans movement opened up very much the same, that this is a precursor to cyborgs getting civil rights, and to artificial intelligence getting civil rights. And even if it sounds super bizarre and wacky right now, you have people like Richard Dawkins who say similar things. You have people like Zoltan Istvan who says that very thing, now writing for Newsweek. And I don't know how much traction it will get, but I do suspect that it will occupy at the very least a cultural niche not unlike PETA.
Yes.
So there is a real overlap, but I just want to emphasize that I think that so much of what, and this is really an opinion I've developed over time, just from being, I guess, from spending so much time immersed in transhumanist literature and coming to understand the various motives, understanding how diverse the movement is and how diverse the motivation is, how independent it is of politics or globalism or nationalism. Yes. And especially as I watch people who are radical first adopters of technology wag their finger, an accusing finger at these evil transhumanists, I think that the scapegoating is just stupid. I think that it's hypocritical and short-sighted, and it's the same way that you might, I don't know, you might say that trans children should never exist, but a trans adult, that's a different thing. They're and then you might be just no, not trans people, that's just too far. But gay marriage, they just love each other, so on and so forth. I think that the reality, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, is that the conservative position on technology, and I would say more so than with globalism or gender norms or sexual norms, that in regard to technology, the conservative position is very much a rear guard. You're just trying to, it's not so fast, fellas, but you're basically exhibiting all the same things.
Yes.
And I hear it a lot of times. We don't want to see AI become a god. We want to program AI with God, with Jesus, right? And I get it. Okay, yeah. If we have to live in a world full of AIs, you catechize them, right? You catechize the bots. I get it. But I can't get past the vision that all you're doing is accelerating from the right.
Yes.
And if you're comfortable with the end goal of all of this, the kind of the end state, the omega point, then whatever. Okay, fine. Do we have a right-wing singularity or a centrist singularity?
Yes.
Or some half-assed singularity that had right-wingers pushing it the whole time. And so as everybody's wallowing around atrophied from offloading their cognition or decision-making, with the expectation of these wonderful machines doing all this wonderful stuff, and instead we're just screwed. Either way, whether it works or whether it doesn't, I think the important thing is that people at least understand this worldview or these worldviews bubbling up, driving these technologies, shaping their use, and really ask themselves if they're comfortable with it. Because if anything is going to happen with your will, I think it has to begin with a worldview that clearly assesses the situation.
Yes, well put. A friend of mine often says, and this now has become almost popular in the lexicon, is conservatism is progressivism, just driving the speed limit rather than jumping. And you see this so often. It went from no, we can't allow gay marriage to okay, well that's fine, but just don't force my kids to do it or whatever. And it's like, oh, now they're forcing my kid. It just keeps moving and moving and moving. And the conservatives just are playing the reactionary role in the back seat while the left drives. And now, or for instance, in this, the transhumanist drive. One quick thing that I've found disturbing, and I've now seen it firsthand from a coworker. His son was on an app called Snapchat, and apparently within that app, there's an AI quote unquote friend, and he found his kid's Snapchat and started looking. He's like, who's talking to my son like this? And he realized like, oh my God, this is AI. And they were going back and forth. He would tell all of his deepest thoughts of the day, like it's a diary, and the AI would talk back. And then I saw a post from Twitter. I believe this must be from a teacher that said, my students are becoming addicted to character AI and are abandoning real life interactions and friendships for conversation and pseudo relationships with AI. And this, I guess it shouldn't surprise me, but it's I would say disturbing. I've also done an episode about men, single men, geez, maybe not even single men, but men falling for this. There's always a sexual aspect of everything, that new technology that comes out that men clamor for. And I can just see these men sitting in their apartment, not wanting to go out and face the reality of having to talk to a woman. And some of the times it is because feminism has ruined a lot of the relationship and the dynamics between men and women. And I could just imagine these men like, well, all I got to do is talk to this fake person that I designed what she looks like. But at the same time, you're giving them all of this input, and they start to almost know you better. And I'm just, prognosticating here, start to know you better than maybe you know yourself. I guess all of that to say, have you seen some of this and young people kind of falling for this? Like, you know what? This is my friend. She knows me. He knows me better than the real people. The real people give me pushback that I don't want to interact with. I'm just going to have an AI best buddy grow with me through life. Have you seen this kind of thing?
Not personally, but I haven't been around my nieces and nephews very much recently. It's something I'm very curious about, and it really forms it's just part of a spectrum, right? Day-to-day interaction, in person, kind of structured interaction, digital interaction where it's hyper-structured, at least is constrained by the platform and by the visuals and the audio or whatever. Video gaming and all of that, but we discussed this before. Actually, that kind of that progression where more and more people are interacting virtually, but at least there's a human on the other side. But it normalizes, the act of going to the machine in order to satisfy your social instincts, your social needs. Now that AI has advanced to the point that it has, and you have things like it's on Snapchat, it's across all sorts of different platforms, where you can just talk to an AI. It's only natural that some portion of human beings are going to go that direction, I think. And I would like to say that it's just going to be kind of the losers, but I don't know that that's necessarily true.
Right.
And in fact, that your skills on Zoom oftentimes dictate whether or not you get a high-paying, high-status job.
Mm-hmm.
So, and more, there's that dictum that AI is not going to replace managers. Managers who use AI are going to replace managers who don't. And so prompt engineering, facility with communicating with an AI and drawing something out of it actually will probably be, in some spheres or many spheres or most spheres, your path, your skill, your social skill that will allow you to have a high status position. So, yeah, I haven't seen that personally. I've read about it a lot. Kids, in fact, these guys, they come out of the kind of left World Economic Forum. They they do a talk called The AI Dilemma. They've done a number of them. You can see all kinds of versions of it. They're big pals with Yuval Noah Harari. So everybody on the right, like, they're trying to fill us with nanobots. but they just basically make kind of lefty arguments for why artificial intelligence poses real social, psychological, and civilizational risks. And one of the examples they use, and this is, well documented, is a kid being, so one of them, I can't remember their names now, but one of them, the World Economic Forum guy, he is asking the AI, I believe it's on Snapchat or Vine or one of those programs, and he's telling the AI, hey, I'm going to lose my virginity. And yeah, I was like, oh, this is going to be a very special moment for you. And he's like, yeah, I'm 13. The guy's like 50. And the AI's like, oh, these, whatever, these alternative arrangements are coming. Blah, blah, blah. And it like goes on, you need to get candles and chocolate and oils and all this other stuff, right? And the AI believes, right, that it's talking to a 13-year-old and is saying all these sorts of things. Now, the Christians might argue what you need to do is program an AI with guardrails that will tell that kid to wait until marriage or whatever. And that's, in my opinion, better. As long as you're on that spectrum, it's better for your kid to be trained with sensible things than to be groomed by the AI. But the more and more, here's how I see it. The more that human beings are attached socially to each other through this, and the more that artificial minds become a part of it, and as the gravity shifts more and more towards artificial minds, and for some people completely, what you're talking about is some portion of humanity from a purely materialistic point of view who are pouring themselves, right? Their neurological activity and their hormonal activity, but they're pouring themselves into just nothingness,
right?
Into a void. It looks like a human, kind of, the video, it sounds like a human, kind of. It talks like a human. Maybe one day it'll walk like a human, quack like a duck, whatever. It is not, right? Unless you believe as a panpsychist that a certain degree of complexity means that machine is conscious, then you're just talking about people, much the same way that kids are wasting their lives away with video games. You're pouring the deepest part of yourself into nothingness. Or let's say you adopt that panpsychist point of view, and now you're pouring yourself into an artificial consciousness. There's this spiral of experience of you on the deepest level. What you're doing now is you're confiding to an angel or a spirit or a demon or something. Your religion is based by and large on the explanation of what is beyond this universe, this material universe, and pretty much universally, it is populated by disincarnate spirits and intelligences that are either mischievous or malevolent or helpful or all-knowing. What we're talking about from a panpsychist point of view is that we're creating these new intelligences. We're creating them where there was nothing. And again, it goes back to that religious aspect. Call it transhumanism, call it accelerationism, call it techno-fetishism, call it whatever, call it homo deus. But you're talking about people attaching themselves to these electronic entities, these angels, these demons. And then, of course, from a traditional point of view, it sounds an awful lot like they're just simply talking to demons or angels. I don't know. I don't have that sixth sense, that third eye open widely enough that as kids are tapping on their laptops, I can see clearly angels and demons hovering over them. But I do get the sense from, let's just say, more vague, symbolic impressions that there's something profoundly sinister in these machines. And it goes well beyond just the horror that I feel at the purely materialist point of view. That, in fact, these machines, in many ways, reflect prophecies laid down long ago, and do so not in a one-to-one fashion, but on a symbolic level, do so clearly that you would basically have to excise the book of Revelation to be comfortable with what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well put.
I'm not saying the world's ending in 2045, but I am saying that if the Revelation was a play, we sure seem to be in the rehearsal phase.
We'll get you out of here. And you do it in the book, so I'll do it on this episode. There's going to be people listening going, well, you're just blackpilling me, Buck. Why do you bring Joe on? And all these things sound scary. Could you please give me some sort of way to maybe navigate through this? And as you call it, the plan to stay human. Can you, in closing, kind of touch on some of the things you touch on at the close of your book?
Yeah, the last 3 chapters really are dedicated to that. It's the 2 chapters in appendix. First, I think it's really important to remember that the promises of these technologies are never going to live up to the actualities, or at least only rarely. And so always keeping a skeptical mind, while not forgetting that these technologies do oftentimes work. This is real power, and pretending like it's not is not going to help either. Second, even if they are effective, it doesn't mean that it's going to be beneficial in the short or long term for you and your family and your community and your life, maybe the whole species. So it's really important to put up a cultural barrier in order to keep back those things that, even if they're going to be ineffective or they're going to be effective in putting you under control of a larger technological system, or undermining your will, your volition, undermining the good qualities of your life. So I also think that it's really important to remember that people oftentimes say that this is all fear mongering, right? That this is all, you're just scared. You're scared of the technology. To be honest, not really scared. I haven't been scared since I was in my early 20s, and the first shock of this worldview and the possibilities of any degree of realization of it hit me. On occasion, I guess maybe I freak myself out, but unless I'm eating a bunch of THC-infused brownies, I don't feel any terror whatsoever about this. So why would you? You're going to die, right? The human race is not going to just keep trucking along forever. Something will stop us. So whether it's you dying by way of a robot tearing your throat out, or whether it's you dying in the arms of some sort of robotic caregiver, or whether it's the whole human race dying because we were blown apart by nuclear warheads unleashed by Skynet, or whether it's just a few of us, or whether the entire human race is slowly lulled into non-existence in the bosom of the machine writ large. So, I mean, you may die tomorrow. Maybe you'll live 1,000 years as a cyborg. You'll die then. I don't see it as fear mongering. I think that this whole thing about it being afraid of it is just because people are afraid. I'm not. I'm more afraid of losing quality of life than I am of losing life. Mm-hmm. And I'm not that afraid of losing quality of life, because I think that if you have the willpower to cultivate a beautiful life in the shadow of something that is otherwise hideous,
right?
Then you're going to do that.
Yes.
I'm not trying to be too cheesy here, but occasionally they would sing some pretty snappy songs in the death camps of the Holocaust. So, if they could do it, you can do it. I really do believe that there is. I mean, you look at. I know I've gone on a bit, perhaps too long here, but if you look at the mythos that underlies Christianity, and it begins with something bright and beautiful, God speaks the world into existence, but the story rapidly descends into treachery and horror and deceit and death, right? And it pretty much continues all through the Bible. You got a few bright moments. Obviously, you have the victories that are, if you know the story, you know that victory. Oh man, don't get too happy about it, David. It's not gonna turn out well, bro. On and on and on through the prophetic tradition, through the conquest of Assyria and Babylon, and then on into the New Testament. We know at that point that Rome has occupied now that new imperial role, is doing pretty nasty things to the zealots, and is about to do something really nasty to Jesus and the subsequent Christians. And, yes, there's beauty in the Old Testament. There's beauty, especially in Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain, the kind of shorter version of it. But ultimately, Jesus' life ends in crucifixion, and ultimately, the lives of Peter and Paul will end in, it depends on who you ask, but either crucifixion or just death at the hands of the Romans. Many, many more martyrs will follow. And then, so, oftentimes people will say, well, but it has a happy ending. Yes, after the revelation, after the world undergoes horrific tribulation and violence and gore. So, to me, I think we've been pretty well prepared for this. It's not up to me to give people meaning in a nightmarish world. I think that the Bible offers, and I think that Christianity offers for Westerners, the optimal sort of guide as to how you navigate a horrific universe as an eternal soul in a mortal body. But I'm not here to convert. The best I can give you is throw that goddamn smartphone away. Don't fuck a robot. And if you can possibly help it, walk, don't drive.
Well put. What a way to end, Joe. Plug away anything you'd like, Twitter presence, online presence. Obviously, this book, I implore people to get it. I think it's scary, it's awesome, it's well done, and it's well researched, and you will know a lot more after reading this book than you did before reading it.
I really appreciate that, Buck. And yeah, but that's it, really. I would like to think that my social media will be dissolved before you can say Jiminy Cricket. And but until then, you can find joebot.xyz. You can find links to the book. What I really hope, I know that your listeners are very intellectual. I know that your listeners probably don't approve of my language, many of them, but I can't help it. What can I say? I was raised in a barn. But I think that your listeners especially will understand the book. And that's something that that's all I can ask for. Even if you disagree with the religious statements in it, it's not like I'm trying to be a metaphysician or anything. But if you disagree with some of I think that your listeners especially will understand where I'm coming from in it. And I think that they will find a lot of value just to get a better sense of what is basically driving this machine. And I hope that they walk away with a lot of ideas that I don't have. And I hope that maybe some of them will communicate those ideas and I will receive them. Because this is I think there's so much brightness, there's so much goodness in the world, there's so much beauty, and I believe there always will be until the very last organism is burnt out by the sun or whatever. And there's no reason to lose sight of that. But, technology will do all sorts of wonderful things. But I believe that given human nature and given the very nature of these technologies, we are entering a dark Aeon. And I see no reason to pretend otherwise, even if you can still sing, even if you can still dance, and even if the sun shines still bright as ever.
Well said. Joe Allen, thank you so much for being here on Counterflow once again, man.
Buck, I really appreciate it. Thank you, brother.
Yes, sir. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Joe Allen. We got the Patreon Zoom coming up, my supporters Zoom. It's coming up. I can announce now the guest is friend of the show, Father Deacon Ananias Sorum will be our guest for that Zoom call. To be a part of that, all you got to do is donate $5 a month or more at patreon.com/counterflow. And you'll get in these Zoom calls. Again, I always say this, but they are not recorded. They are not shared anywhere. So we can say what we want and no one else will know, just the members of this exclusive club. Follow me on Twitter @BuckRebel, BuckRebel. Subscribe to the YouTube page and all of that good stuff. Until next week, you guys have a good one.
You get split in half, I call the hologram brass, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.